All right, so we'll kind of get started here. So my name is Ariel, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the APN this year. So hello and welcome to our 13th annual APN conference, Advanced Practice Nursing, hosted by the Graduate Nursing Students Association from the University of Manitoba's College of Nursing. Thank you for joining us on this, blizzardy evening in Manitoba anyways. Just a note that all the cameras are going to be turned off except for our speakers as they're speaking, as it just tends to cause some of the lagging in our system. We will also be recording, as you've seen, the conference for those who could not make it to the conference but wanted to watch at a later date. So as I said, my name's Ariel. I'm one of the co-chairs along with my co-chair Abby and our secretary Ashley, and we are the APN Conference Exec Committee. So before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So the topic of this year's conference is the role of the advanced practice nurse in equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have 3 fantastic speakers lined up who will be speaking on this topic as it applies to their practice and their experience as advanced practice nurses. Our speakers tonight in order of presentation are Dr. Vanessa Van Buer, Dr. Rani Srivastava, and Anne Nzeruem. Following each speaker, we're going to have a 5-minute Q&A period. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and our committee members, Ashley and Karen, will monitor it and ask them. You can also use the hand raise function if need be. This year's conference is also going to be collaborating with a local charity, Needs Inc. The Graduate Nursing Students Association will be matching donations made on behalf of this event. Needs representation, Eric Goodbranson, is here. So Eric, if you wouldn't mind just touching on a few of your organization goals, just for those who are not aware.
Yeah, I'd love to, Ariel. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And good evening, everybody. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know there's some exciting speakers coming up. But if you're not familiar with our organization, first off, my name is Eric. I'm the manager of volunteer services for Needs Inc., which stands for Newcomers Employment and Education Development Services Inc. We are a nonprofit charitable organization here in Winnipeg that provides free and accessible services to newcomer immigrants and refugee children, youth, and their families. Lots of different supports that we do. We do in-school supports with our settlement workers in schools. We have after-school supports for kids with our remote after-school mentorship program. Employment service supports through our employment services program, helping those newcomers who are trying to get into the Canadian job market. Psychosocial support, family engagement activities, all kinds of different supports and services. Now, as a nonprofit and having our services be free to our clients, that's obviously really important that we get funding in order to do that. We get a lot of funding from the Government of Canada, but also from donations as well. So if anyone is interested in the work that we do, if you're interested and able in donating to that as well, please check out our website. It's www.needsinc.ca. Whatever page you go onto, there's always a donate button at the bottom. So just scroll down, you can donate through there. Every donation is so important for the work that we do. Beyond that, as a manager of volunteer services, I want to take a minute to just talk about volunteer opportunities at our agency too, which are always so important. Again, being a nonprofit, any volunteer or practicum student supporting programming is crucial for every single program and service that we offer. We have, again, in our remote after-school mentorship program, there's remote opportunities through our Introduction to Canadian Education program. We have in-person opportunities. We're even starting a initiative in partnership with MANSO, where we are referring out volunteers that we recruit to other service providing organizations in Manitoba who are supporting Ukrainian newcomers, with the number of Ukrainian newcomers coming in. So a lot of awesome volunteer opportunities. If you're interested in any of those, same thing, please check out our website, needsinc.ca. We have a volunteer tab on there. You can find more information about our opportunities or apply for any of them here as well. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for letting me be here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. We did put the link in the chat to the website if anybody is interested in having a look there as well. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So tonight, on a final note, is we do have some wonderful door prizes. So everyone in attendance who has registered on the Eventbrite will be entered into a draw to win one of 2 grand prize gift baskets. There's also 4 $25 gift cards to Starbucks and Amazon. We also have a Shapes package and an escape room and activate gift card. So this is basket 1. It's by Lend Me Some Sugar Bath Company, and it's owned by Nurse Courtney Gordon. So you can kind of see there's a bath bombs and bath tea, bath salts, hand soaps, face masks, that kind of fun stuff. And then our second package is going to be a Made in Manitoba. So this has been from the Tiger Hills Arts Association, where all items are local and handmade by local makers. So there's a quilted tablet cover, bookmark, hangable art, soap, face scrubs, and then a bunch of other little goodies all in there. So what we will do is the winners after the conference will be drawn, and by the email that they use to register, we will send them the information. And it'll also be posted, on GNSA social media accounts as well, so you can look there. So without further ado, we would like to welcome Knowledge Keeper Brenda Longclaws to bring remarks.
Thank you, Ariel. Okay, good evening, everybody. So I do bring traditional greetings, bonjour. Wabanu gudiktish nikas, meneze being donji, mikanak to them. I've just told you my spirit name, where I'm from, and my clan. And I do want to say that I am one of the knowledge keepers. Well, I guess I am the knowledge keeper now at College of Nursing. And I want to welcome everybody to the land of my ancestors, the Plains of Ojibwe, of which I am a part of. And I do want to acknowledge the land here today that we are living on and walking on. And yes, it is snowy and not exactly what we were hoping for, but we take every day as it comes and we're grateful for that. I want to thank the organizers for the conference, for inviting me to say a few words at the beginning. I think it's obviously a lot of work that what you've done and put together. And I just want to say thank you to the scholars who are going to be presenting tonight and sharing their work related to this year's topic. And when I think of that topic that we are going to be discussing tonight, it reminds me of some of the core values that Indigenous people have related to education. And that is, I guess the first one is really respect, that we all have a right to exist and flourish, and we have to recognize that in each other and give that respect to every human being. The second R is relationship. And it reminds me that, we are all related here on Mother Earth, not only the peoples, the human beings, but also the land, the sky, the birds, the animals. We are all related and we all have a responsibility to look after each other. And with that also comes the law of the circle, which is reciprocity, that in that respect and relationship, that we only take what we need, and that we do recognize that we have a responsibility to participate in the world of the human being, in the world of Mother Earth, and that is something that will happen whenever we develop relationships and offer respect to each other. We will get something back from each other. It's just the law of the circle. And finally, around responsibility. We all have a responsibility to develop our gifts. And I think that's what is being shared tonight with everyone, is the gifts of these 3 scholars, the teachings, the learnings that they've developed, and certainly with the understanding is that with more knowledge, we have more responsibility. And so I do want to thank the scholars again tonight who are going to be presenting. I want to thank all the participants for taking the time out tonight to listen and learn, and I hope you're doing so with open hearts. And I just want to say again, thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words this evening. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for that. Just so we know, this is because we're not in person, unfortunately, we cannot offer the traditional tobacco offering. So for most of all of our speakers, and we have offered out tobacco offerings. So those who have accepted, we will get them to you. If you haven't got them yet, we will make sure that you get them. So next we would like to welcome Dr. Neetha Dick, Dean of the University of Manitoba's College of Nursing, to bring her remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Ariel. And thank you, Brenda, for your beautiful opening. We really appreciate your support of our students and faculty. So great to see you here tonight. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. As Dean of the College of Nursing at the University of Manitoba, I am just very delighted to welcome you to the 13th Annual Advanced Practice Nursing Conference. Thank you very much for your interest and your participation here this evening. We're just delighted with this great turnout here tonight. I congratulate the Graduate Nursing Students Association for organizing and hosting this special conference, and thank the Planning Committee for their excellent work. A special thank you to the conference co-chairs, Ariel Wilcox and Abby Kawadza, for their excellent work. We recognize the extensive efforts expended to organize and host a conference such as this, and really appreciate your excellence. And I'd also like to thank the Planning Committee members, including Hannah Mohammed, Naomi Arma, Karen Livingston, Ashley Bell, and Karen Vercour. I want to commend the GNSA for their success in hosting this conference for 13 consecutive years. It is particularly noteworthy, as most of our graduate students are working while studying, and yet they make time for this very important contribution. So thanks to all of the graduate students and the GNSA. This APN conference is addressing a very important topic, and one that is a priority across our University of Manitoba, that of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I look forward to hearing from our three stellar speakers this evening to learn more about how they have integrated an EDI lens in their everyday practice. Our faculty, staff, and students are committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and are interested in learning more about the actual application and integration of EDI. So I extend a very warm welcome to our three panelists, including Nzeruem, Dr. Rani Srivastava, and our very own Dr. Vanessa Van Buren. Thank you very much for your exemplary work and leadership in integrating EDI principles, and for your presentation here tonight. At the College of Nursing, we are privileged to have the opportunity to provide graduate education to prepare advanced practice nurses for the healthcare system, as they have a very critical role within the healthcare system. We have delivered our graduate program for more than 42 years and are proud of our more than 600 graduates from our programs over the years. Our master's program has 4 streams of administration, education, clinical practice, and nurse practitioner. Our PhD in nursing program began in 2013, and we're proud of our 11 graduates from that program who are providing exemplary service and leadership in healthcare and in our College of Nursing. So we're delighted that many of our graduates from our graduate programs are now working as faculty within our College of Nursing. The College of Nursing is committed to and making progress in continually learning more about the integration of EDI in the workplace, in teaching, in research, in service, and in our policies and practices. So I'm excited to learn more about this from our speakers this evening. So thanks again for coming, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Dyke. I'm Abby Kawadza, one of the other coaches. So moving along to our program, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our first speaker. So our first guest speaker is Dr. Vanessa Van Buren. She's an assistant professor in the College of Nursing at the University of Manitoba. Weaving her background as a Métis spoken word artist and storyteller into her career as a scholar and researcher, Vanessa is passionate about encouraging others to use the art to think creatively about social justice in their own lives and their own communities. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Vanessa Van Buren.
I am just going to make sure that I've got my slideshow. Okay, so I thank you first off to the committee. What a wonderful turnout that you've had today. So really wonderful. Thank you also to Brenda Longclaws Miwetch. What a beautiful acknowledgement that you've shared. And thank you also to Dr. Dick for welcoming us today. And I look forward to presenting a bit on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So when I was asked to do this by Ariel and Abby, I thought, well, I'm a professor and I'm an educator. And so I don't know if I qualify as an advanced practice nurse, but perhaps education is advanced practice nursing. And so I am very happy to be sharing my thoughts and my perspectives on this. And so my presentation today is on stories and storytelling for equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I wanted to start off by talking a bit about my own background. And so I am Métis on my mom's side, although I always identify as Métis because I was raised Métis, and English settler ancestry on my dad's side. I'm also Francophone. I'm a French speaker, Red River Métis, I should say. That's what we're supposed to call ourselves now. I'm a nurse, an assistant professor, a storyteller in the College of Nursing here at the University of Manitoba. My background clinically is mostly in adolescent mental health and sexually transmitted infections, but I'm really passionate about nursing education, and I'm really passionate about stories and storytelling. Now, I always locate myself a bit. So as I said, I'm Métis from the Red River. I call myself a daughter of the Red River. The man you see circled there, that's André Beauchemin, and that is my third great grandfather. He was the MLA for St. Vital in L'Oreal's provisional government. He was also in the first provincial government in 1870. And St. Vital is just up the road from the University of Manitoba campuses. And when I think about André and many of my other great-great-grandfathers who were also either in L'Oreal's army, my great-great-great-grandmothers who were also, mothers of the resistance as well. I think about this wonderful story about how they helped bring Manitoba into Confederation, and yet within a generation they lost their lands. They lived in the Métis and in my own family in particular lived in poverty, and were not seen, not held in the same esteem that they had once when they brought Manitoba into Confederation. And on the other side of my family, on my dad's side of the family, my great grandparents were given land in Western Saskatchewan that one of my father's cousins still owns and still farms. And so I think about this dichotomy between these two sides of the family, how one side, did these amazing things to bring Manitoba into Confederation and then lost all land and lived quite a few hardships. And then on the other side to have been given a legacy of wealth and the differences between those. And so I usually do a land acknowledgement, but we had such a beautiful one done earlier by Brenda. So I'm going to do my own, and this is a spoken word that I wrote. And it was written thinking about L'Oreal and thinking about how how we have changed as a society in our views of him, and how he was once seen as a traitor to Canada, and now that he's revered and he's seen in other ways. And so this one is called Manitoba. I close my eyes this eve for a century of moonless nights. My children will live in the margins of every book you write, denied of their own story and of your promise to their rights, ashamed of who they are, abandoning the fight. But one dawn I will awaken to the tremble of 10,000 feet. The sound of laughter and singing will echo as you creep. The red is rising, you will decry, afraid of what this means. We were never born by fourths or halves. Nothing is as it seems. Well, the war was never won by cannon, rifle, or rope hung. The war is won through prose and paint, our artists just begun. Surely you can see me now, in shadows I live no more. I'll take my place by the sun, as my people take the floor. Whether by scrip or by treaty, by treason or wooden yoke, We are the face of a province, both the ember and the smoke. We are the jingle, we are the jig. We are the hoop, we are the round. We are the narrows the Great Spirit built. We were never lost and never found. Now, so you might be wondering, how can stories and storytelling be used for equity, diversity, and inclusion? And well, stories are really powerful. They help us make sense of the world. They have been passed down through generation to generation. They're present in every society and every culture, from childhood age to old age. We all share in stories. We all develop stories. We all tell stories, and we all carry stories within ourselves. Stories can help people speak for themselves. They can help people share their authentic experiences. They can help people explore multiple identities and take pride in those experiences. By listening to stories, we can promote solidarity and allyship. Stories can inspire questions. They can inspire dialogue. They can inspire sharing of similar experiences. Once we hear a story from somebody that we thought we shared nothing in common with, and all of a sudden we do, it helps us make connections within and between cultures, between groups and communities. And it can also open opportunities for talking about power, oppression, and injustice. And stories can also help us challenge stereotypes, generalization, and prejudice by helping people engage in meaningful dialogue. Muriel Rukeyser is famous for saying, the universe is not made of atoms, but made of stories. And that is so true. We are made of stories. We are people of stories. And there are so many powerful ways in which stories help us understand each other, but they're also democratic. They're freely available to all of us. We need neither wealth nor education to share in our stories, to develop stories. And oftentimes oral storytelling in particular has been used as a tool of resistance. And by analyzing stories, it can help us really understand other people in ways that perhaps analyzing other traditional texts might not be helpful. But not all stories are heard equally or equitably. In the world, we have 4 common types of stories that are out there, and some are more common than others. So there's stock stories, there's concealed stories, and there's resistance stories and counter stories. So stock stories. Stock stories are stories about stock characters that are shared and shaped by people who hold power. They present perspectives that are the status quo, that support existing power structures and hierarchies, and they present the world as neutral and avoid taking on any sort of responsibility. We also call these stories, stock stories, master narratives, and I use master, meaningfully in the sense of thinking about how stories can actually enslave. When narratives are written, centered, and manipulated by those in power, and when these stories shape medical and legal decisions, for example, they can harm families, they can harm patients, they can harm communities. So we have to think about, even in our clinical practices as healthcare providers, that we have stock stories that we share about people, about certain patients, about certain families, about certain communities. I think about the deaths of Brian Sinclair and Joyce Echaquan as really powerful stock stories that we have in Canada and that healthcare providers carry, and they're very, very harmful. And so when we think about when people present to the emergency department, when we hear stories about in BC where doctors were guessing the blood alcohol level of Indigenous patients that presented to the ER, those are shaped, doing such things those are our behaviors that are shaped by stock stories about who Indigenous people are. And often, those affect the way that we communicate with patients, with families, and with communities. And one of the reasons that stock stories shape clinicians so much is because we are relying on implicit bias. And so implicit bias is very hard to challenge. It's implicit for a reason. And that implicit bias can lead to incorrect diagnoses and improper care. So it's really important to think about stock stories in healthcare, in advanced practice nursing, and think about how these are harmful and how do we challenge them. Concealed stories. Concealed stories are stories that are just beneath the surface. They are either overshadowed or suppressed by other stories, stock stories most often. They are conveniently forgotten. Concealed stories represent a more encompassing view of reality, however, if they're allowed to emerge. This is a photo of Kamloops Indian Residential School. It's from the National Archives. It was taken in 1930. For the longest time in Canada, the story of residential schools was concealed. Yet survivors of residential schools had shared their stories, but these stories were largely concealed. 2 years ago, the discovery of unmarked graves at the site of Kamloops residential schools painfully demonstrated how stories can be metaphorically and literally concealed. What stories did those 215 lives carry? Yet still some try to push those stories back. There's still stock stories of denialism. And so what stories do we conceal in healthcare? What stories do we continue to suppress? And so we have to think about those. And how can we honor stories that have been past concealed? How can we continue to how do we continue to tend to our own learning, our own self-reflection on power and on privilege, on our own social identities, and how we might have contributed to concealing stories? Resistance stories. These are stories of injustice that are resisted by communities or collectives. These are stories of rights being asserted. This is a photo of protesters at the Dakota Pipeline protests. But other resistance stories are Inuit women who go into hiding when it's time to give birth because they don't want to go down south. And in healthcare, we often view resistance stories as stories of non-compliance. And so we'll say that the patient is non-compliant. But what underpins non-compliance is really important to explore. And we have to think about the fact that for resistance stories are really important and resistance is really important. And thinking about, I was reading a recent research paper about Indigenous resistance on Turtle Island. And Indigenous resistance on Turtle Island has actually prevented 1.587 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. That sum totals 24% of the annual emissions for the US and Canada. And so it's so powerful, right? And these achievements were won mostly through Indigenous physical demonstrations, legal challenges, and shifting public perceptions. And so when we think about resistance stories and how much they benefit, not just Indigenous people, they benefit everyone. And counter stories. Counter stories are stories of resurgence and restorying. They recognize the embodied and experiential knowledge as legitimate. And I put up this picture because that was taken at the Angwamazin Indigenous Health Research Symposium in 2018. And that's one example of restoring and resurgence and led by Indigenous people. And when applied in healthcare, counter stories can help expose injustices. They can highlight the voices and experiences of patients and families that might otherwise be missed or ignored. And in doing so, this counter stories can be a tool to help clinicians recognize racism and other systems of oppression in their work. And it can help explore a patient's family or a patient or a family's unique experience or perspectives in order to provide individual co-created care. And how important is that? So to be attentive to these counter stories that you might hear in your work, and it's very difficult at times to think of, to imagine counter stories, but they're very important. Now, what is storytelling? So there are stories and there's storytelling, and those are slightly different. But so storytelling is ancient and universal. It occurs in every culture, and their purpose are to entertain, to inform, to sustain cultural traditions and values. It's the telling of story through voice and gestures, and it can take many forms. So there's poetry, there's chants, song is storytelling, of course, and they can encompass myths, legends, fables, prayers, proverbs, and instructions. And when I think about Indigenous storytellers, and there's Indigenous storytellers all over the world, they were the first performance artists. The drama of stories is enhanced by the storyteller so that the audience can experience the drama, and the enactment keeps ancient stories alive. And so I was going to do a story rather than a spoken word, because I do both. And this one is called Freedom. And it was inspired, I wrote it during the pandemic when I kept seeing a lot of protests, people talking about their individual liberties and their freedoms, and in particular with masks and regarding vaccines. And we saw a lot of that in the US too, about people really asserting their individualism and their individual rights. And so this was written thinking about those things and the consequences of those things when taken to the end. This is a story about how my town went feral, one bear at a time. It began with the pursuit of freedom and a deregulation of all crime. a dystopic dream born from the darkest web to live in unregulated autonomy from cradle to deathbed. We numbered few at first in this glorious free town. On the outskirts of the woods, we gathered both lost and found. We came from far and wide, idealists one and all, our little town a beacon to the freedom call. But soon our population swelled on both sides of the line, those with money to burn and those without a dime. We had a vision though, as disparate as we were, a common cause united us, a libertarian life to assure. We attacked local governments first and severed the suckling at the civic teat. Through rallies and onerous litigation, we dismantled the county seat. Potholes multiplied, domestic rows ensued, violent crimes intensified, an unexpected crisis loomed. When the Bears first entered the scene, we didn't really care. This is Freedom Town after all. Let the Bears fight for their share. But soon our cats went missing, our dogs and children too. And finally, a few women were mauled while making stew. The Liberty Project continued though, as new compatriots arrived, all looking for their own slice of the freedom pie. We kept building further and beyond. Our sovereign nations grew. Encroaching on Bear territory, they grew emboldened too. And the newly brazen Bears had their own visions to manifest. Unsecured garbage bins became the first thing they addressed. They pillaged human waste, feasted on high glycemic treats. Operating under vampire rules, the Bears would not retreat. Angry from a lack of rest, a diabetic bear emerged, a thing we'd not anticipated when online we'd first converged. What to do with the Bears, we pondered? Maybe nothing at all. Some didn't mind the company. They're only a problem in summer, spring, and fall. So some patriots fed the Bears while others bought more guns. A faction formed to kill a dozen before the rising sun. But the Bears came back a greater pest. In broad daylight they lazed. On patios and in backyards, the Bears remained unfazed. Slowly but surely, our town unraveled, pitched battles big and small, about whose version of freedom is really free after all. The rich left seeking new frontiers, the poor stayed to eke out a life in this fiercely contested market, replete with human bear strife. See, living free is not an absolute, but more a matter of degree. Depending which side of the line you fall, the outcomes are not felt equally. Inevitably, as we've grimly learned, when 800-pound problems come to a head, free competition and individual resolve might render the whole town dead. So what is spoken word? Spoken word is the art of storytelling through rhythm. It's the oldest form of poetry. It began in the Harlem Renaissance, which was the mecca for spoken word poetry. And the context was of war, destruction, discrimination, and loss. And then there was a cultural and artistic explosion of Black writers, musicians, poets, trying to find space to voice their resistance. And this was more than just a literary movement. It involved a revolution demanding civil and political rights for Black people in America. And spoken word is the foundation of hip hop and rap in the US and of punk in the UK. And how can storytelling be used in healthcare, you might be wondering? It can be used as a research method. So for example, in digital storytelling and photo voice, participatory theater. One of the caveats though is generally along with the research, along with the more artistic or the storytelling part of the research, there's a demand also to do more academic things like writing a manuscript. And so sometimes I wonder, what does that really say about our epistemologies in nursing and in research more generally, if we always have to have oral storytelling or storytelling in other formats always be accompanied by the academic manuscript as well, then who are we excluding if we continue to make those the rules of entry or the rules of participation? Storytelling can be used for knowledge dissemination and translation. So I have done research in the past where I've done sharing circles with nursing students, for example, and then of course I did write the traditional manuscript with the findings, but I also translated it into a poem, the findings. And so I find that a really effective way to communicate to more audiences. And it's used as a way to learn more about patients, clients, families, and communities. And how often do we really listen to stories, right? We're so busy doing our work, but we can learn so much through stories about each other and about ourselves. And stories and storytelling can be used as a form of advocacy. I'm going to finish with a spoken word. And this one's called On the Back of a Raven. And I wrote it when I was in my PhD. And I was thinking about exactly about what I just said, that we are often required to do certain things for academic requirements, the 3-minute thesis and so on and so forth. And we present this information and distill all of your research in 3 minutes. And everybody's so busy trying to distill all of this information in 3 minutes. And generally, sometimes they're really interesting. Some people do them really well. But I've never found myself do it very well. And so rather at one of these PhD Helen Glass research symposiums, I had thought, well, I'm going to do a spoken word instead of doing the 3-minute thesis. And my advisor was Dr. Roberta Woodgate, and she's wonderful. And she said, she goes, go for it, Vanessa. Just don't tell anybody so they don't tell you no. Anyhow, it turned out fine, but I was grateful for her for saying it. And sometimes we have to be told, especially as advanced practice nurses and graduate students, to follow your heart, follow your gut, and do what you want to do. So without further ado, this is On the Back of a Raven. I'm so sick and tired of always doing what's right. I'm so sick and tired of hearing, it's not my fight. I mean, you and your ivory tower, you and your glass house, you with your straw man arguments, you who's only ever shown me doubt. I'm so sick and tired of hearing no, of trying to convince you of truths long ago. If these books can talk, so too can these stones. It's not for me to look elsewhere. This here is my home. Well, you can lock all the doors, you can turn a blind eye, go to church on Sunday, find salvation and tithe, but we'll be here tomorrow. We don't ever lose sight. Our place on this turtle is a gift, not a right. But for all the king's horses and all the chief's men, what if we can't put this back together again? What then, say the weakest, as we lay in our kingdom of dirt? So what, say the strongest, as they wield their empire of hurt? But on the back of a raven, I flew to the moon, and she whispered back gently, your time is soon. So we slept for 100, but not one day more. We have drowned in that river. We will dance on her shore. To children no more, to sisters still missing. We hear you. It's time for more than just listening. Miigwech, merci. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Just a reminder that if anybody has questions, you can always post them in the chat too.
Okay, I guess at this point we do not have any questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Vanessa, for such a powerful and rich presentation. Thank you. Since we do not have any questions for Dr. Van Buwer, we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Rani Hajela Srivastava. She is the Dean of Nursing at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. She's recognized for her leadership in cultural competence and bridging academia and practice environments. She is the author and editor for the Healthcare Professionals Guide to Cultural Competence, a second edition, which was published in 2022, and has written several books, chapters and articles on topics of cultural identity, religion, ethics, and family-centered care. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Rani Hajela Srivastava.
Thank you so much, Abby, Ariel, and everybody. It is a delight and a real pleasure to be here with you. I am just going to share my screen. Give me a second. I'm not the most tech savvy, so please bear with me while I figure out where I am. Okay, here we go. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And are you seeing it in full screen mode, or are you seeing it in my sort of, let me try that. Is that better?
It's good. Yeah, it's good. We do have the current slide
Okay.
highlighted, and then you have the others on the side. So we are good.
Oh, do you still see them, the others on the side as well?
Yes, we do.
Because what I have on my screen is just that. Okay. I have no idea how I'm going to fix this, but it doesn't matter. You can see them, that's what counts. Let me see, let me try this one more time. No, that's not going to work. Okay.
Okay.
I want to first acknowledge, so I've kind of titled my presentation around equity, diversity, and inclusion in education and practice, and I will try and share with you some of my thoughts and my approach and my experiences as we go along. I want to begin by acknowledging I am coming to you today from Kamloops, BC, which is the traditional and unceded territories of the Secwepemc people, to Kamloops to Secwepemc within Secwepemc Ulu. And I thought I would just put some pictures of the beautiful land. And I moved to BC and Kamloops 3 years ago, and it is such a wonderful opportunity for me. I'm enjoying it. And as you can see from the beauty of the lands, it's such a privilege to live, work, and play here. And every morning and every evening, and I think every day, I just really feel very grounded and blessed to be here. So very, very grateful to draw the energy from the land and from the people around the land. You know, I want to actually really thank Vanessa for her presentation, and you've just got me thinking. It's so hard for me to focus on what I wanted to share because you've got me thinking so much around stories and poems. And that reminded me of when I first started to do this work and trying to think about how do I talk about what culture and diversity and equity and inclusion means to me. It was really hard. And so when I was doing the first edition of the book, and I am not a poet, I am not a storyteller, I'm not creative at all, but out came a poem. So you've just inspired me to share that with you. So I'll begin with that, and I think it'll frame the rest of the presentation, and it actually very much frames my work. So when I was trying to think about how I talk about how I understand diversity and difference, and some of that has to do with who I am. So I am, as you can tell by looking at me, I am from India, and I came to Canada as an adolescent. And so my upbringing is that of an immigrant, but also very, very tied into the culture, and particularly the healthcare culture here. So the poem is entitled Discovering the Difference. We go looking for culture and cultural meanings, only to find issues of equity and power. Our hidden expressions and lack of compliance are really a reflection of limitations imposed on us by a system, a society. They say it values difference and diversity, but what it really wants is conformity. The issue is racism, the challenge discrimination. The patterns are lost in the processes of racialization. Being an other is to be inferior. Why can't it be equal or even superior? I do what I do because of who I am, but also what you have made me to be. Different can be strong or it can be weak. The answer, the choices is ours to seek. It is only when we embrace the difference and deal with forces that impose conformity that we will discover cultures and the true value of diversity. So I hope that started to kind of reflect a little bit on what equity, diversity, and inclusion and what diversity means to me, and of how I have come to understand it through all of these various processes. So I want to begin with, what does equity diversity mean to you, and why does this actually matter? Right? Why does this matter to you as a person, as a nurse, as a nursing student, as an advanced practice nurse, as an educator, and as a leader? For me, as a person, I think I started on this journey before I even knew the words equity, and I understood what diversity was. Having grown up in Canada, but coming from a different country, I knew that culture mattered, that what was important for me and my family in healthcare wasn't necessarily what I was learning in nursing school. As a person promoting fairness and inclusion, I think it was just something just really important to me. I just wasn't looking at it from any particular lens, but fairness was important. Everybody had a right to be who they were. When I went into nursing and I understood that culture mattered in care, it became really important for me to think about, how do I provide that quality person-centered care that integrates culture? So I put some of the common responses I often get when I talk about why does this matter. People talk about promoting fairness and inclusion. We want to support social justice and support equity priority groups in particular. Often the mandate to do this work is to align with organizational mission and vision. It is the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the politically right thing to do, and sometimes it is what comes from our heart. Sometimes it is just to manage various stakeholders. And in healthcare, we talk a lot about providing culturally safe care. And you'll notice I put culturally in a different color to highlight that. Why do we need to quantify safe care? Because for me, and this is one of my values, is that, a lot of my career has been spent in professional practice quality. How can you provide quality care without paying attention to culture? Safe care has to be culturally safe, or it is not safe. It is not quality. Oh, now I'm going to figure out. Oh, okay. My slides won't move. Next slide. Nope, not that. Okay, I'm going to do it this way. I'm just going to try something different and see if I can do a slideshow from here and if that changes anything. One of the things that I wanted to talk briefly about is, can I just get a confirmation? Are the slides changing? Ariel?
Yes, they're changing. We're still seeing the little, like your slides on the side and then your main one, but they are changing.
Okay, part of it is I have two screens and I see two different things on screens and I don't quite know how to change that. So bear with me, I'll just continue with that, and I apologize. I hope it's not too distracting.
No.
So one of the reasons why it's so hard, I think, sometimes to understand equity, diversity, and inclusion work is because it's not always visible. You don't see a lot of those things. I love the way Vanessa talked about the stories that are concealed, the stories that are hidden. Culture is also something that is not seen, that is hidden, and it's so embedded in those stories. We don't see it because we're so caught up in the dominance of Eurocentric ways. This is the right way to do things. This is the majority of the way to do things. So we don't see other ways of being, other possibilities. There's often a lack of role models, a lack of support and resources, a fear of not being the expert or not knowing what to do, doing or saying the wrong thing. And often people worry, well, if I start this, I don't know if I have the expertise, I don't know if I can manage it. Another big thing that has happened, I think, in our healthcare discourse in particular, is because we bring different and divergent perspectives, there are divergent journeys and paths. There's often a desire to think about what's the right way to look at and understand equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm going to tell you, I don't think there is a right way. There are many right ways. And there are some core concepts that are really important to understand. And that's what I will try and share with you. That's how I've tried to navigate and understand this work. For the educators, because I know many of you, this is, at your university, my university, and I've been an educator in different places. I think there's an added layer of challenge because we're trying to teach about these concepts. We're trying to model the behaviors, but often it is very difficult to surface and effectively address the issues when the content is so heavy, but we also have to look at both content and process. So how do we both teach about, model, and manage? And I don't mean manage in a contained way, but manage in a way that allows for some transformative experiences, some positive generative learning to occur. And how do we balance this engagement and critical inquiry and positive learning in this divergently skilled and socially located environment? Everybody is coming at it from a different place in a different way. And it's hard to try to create, where's that common ground for conversation sometimes? So I'm going to actually give you, here's the punchline, or here's the conclusion of what I'm going to say. And then I'll take the next little bit of time to tell you why and how I got there. First of all, the hardest thing about equity, diversity, inclusion is to make it visible. So way forward, make it visible to yourself and to others. That whole importance of unlearning and learning. We often talk about what we have to learn, but it's also what we have to unlearn. What do we need to see differently? What are the stories we haven't seen that we need to surface? It is about changing your paradigm and what is the norm. It is also about mitigating the harm. While we're looking at changing the system and structures and understanding, we know harm continues to happen. There is more than enough data and evidence in healthcare for us to not understand that and for us to ignore that. Each of us as nurses, as advanced practice nurses, as leaders, as educators, it is critical that we work to change the system. And it is critical that we accentuate our expertise with humility and our confidence with vulnerability. So what are my conclusions? That's it. And now I'm going to back up and tell you a little bit more about. Okay, I think my slides are now moving. So I'm going to go back to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what do we really mean? Diversity, if you think about it, is really just the state of being different. It means that there are unlikeness in different things and different people. The spectrum of individual differences and corresponding group memberships. This is straight out of dictionary.com. What's important, though, is to understand that while the term diversity may be neutral, in our context in healthcare, it is not. It is really important for us to understand which differences matter and under what circumstances. For me, in my various careers and my various aspects of the role, sometimes what matters most is my gender. Sometimes what matters most is my profession. For many years as a chief nurse in a hospital, I'm the nursing leader, often trying to compete for credibility with physician leaders or other leaders, right? So how do we understand diversity and which differences matter? How do we know that? How do we see that? Equity. What does that mean? In this last, I would say, few years, we hear a lot about people using the word equity. Oh, but Rani, this wouldn't be equitable. And I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think you mean equity here. So for me, when I think about equity, it is really looking at equality of outcomes. We need to treat people differently. We need to understand their needs differently to achieve the same results. And what is inclusion? For me, inclusion is actions that are aimed at ensuring that everyone has a sense of belonging and the ability to participate, to share their stories, to be heard, to be understood. A lot of my work has always been around cultural diversity. And so this is where I talked about in the poem in terms of discovering the difference. I came to this work looking at it from a lens of cultural diversity. And it was only through reflection and doing some of the work that I realized that there's only a whole layer of difference. And it really doesn't matter what the culture is, it's the difference that becomes important. So for me, culture is about the values and beliefs and ways of being in the world. But diversity is just different from each other but we also have come to understand it as different from the norm, however we define what that norm is. So while culture got associated with ethnicity, race, religion, country of origin, etc., diversity added that layer of different from the norm. Culture is about shared patterns, ways of being, as I said. Being different also means being marginalized, excluded. So for me, when I think about cultural identity, I go back to that line is about, I do what I do because who I am. I am a South Asian woman. I am a Hindu. I am, immigrant to Canada. All of those things shape who I am and what I do. But some of my behaviors and what I do and who I have become is because I have had to learn to understand and experience marginalization, exclusion, racism. And that is what our patients and our families and our students are also navigating. And I never forget that. So when I talk about culture, I talk about it in two ways. Culture as patterns and culture as power. The patterns is that diversity of our ways of being, who we are, what we bring, how we interact. And the culture as power is what our social location is. So how close am I to the center of power and privilege? How far am I from that center? Where do I have power? Where do I have privilege? And I think those are really important concepts to understand for ourselves and for others. So the approach to care for me, and this was actually formed many years ago when I was working as an advanced practice nurse, actually, as a clinical nurse specialist. And we were talking about how do I provide quality care to everybody? And for me, that quality care had to integrate culture. I can't provide person-centered care if I don't know who the person is, if I don't see who the person is and all their being. So at the hospital I was working, we were having a lot of conversation around, the work that we were doing. And people were talking about employment equity and others were talking about anti-racism. And I kept saying, but you can't forget culture. And so out of all of those conversations came this framework, which then has just developed a little bit further since then, quite a bit further actually. But it was about what did I need to understand as a practitioner and what did I need to understand as an advanced practice nurse and as an educator to teach others. And so this is my way of looking at it. It is very much based on the work of Madeline Leininger and transcultural nursing, but it is my interpretation and understanding. So for me, it's about having cultural sensitivity, cultural knowledge, having access to resources. And at the end of the day, it is also really important to be clear on what is the goal? Why are we doing this? We're doing this to look at ensuring that the care I deliver for me is culturally congruent. It meets the need of that person, not just from a superficial safety or quality, but one that they would say feels safe culturally. They would say reflects quality, because if it doesn't have the cultural piece, it's not safe and it's not quality care. And given our restrictions on time, I won't go through the whole thing and I'll just talk about the cultural sensitivity. And again, we often get caught up in words about, why use the word sensitivity? Isn't that limiting? All words are limiting and all words are powerful. It is how we experience them. So for me, culture sensitivity is something that includes privilege and marginalization. My own, that is the biggest piece. It's understanding my own values, beliefs, and biases and prejudices. Because when I understand those, I know how to manage them better, right? And this is where I highlighted understanding the dynamics of difference and how the power and identities are constituted in our historical, current, local, and global. Which narratives are heard, which stories become powerful, and which stories become lost. Part of cultural sensitivity is also important. How do others see you? As an educator, as a leader, as a dean, as an advanced practice nurse, when I go up to students or to patients and families, how do they see me? As nurses, as leaders, we often see ourselves as that warm, fuzzy, trustworthy, I'm the kitten, I'm the person who's here to bring comfort. But for many others, they may see us as a threat, as the lion. So it is really important to recognize that how we see ourselves is shaped by our own views and our biases, and it's not necessarily how others see us. So that's a taste of what I mean by cultural sensitivity and why it becomes important for us to understand who we are. And then that leads to, how do we see others? How do others see themselves? Because that is also what's important for me to understand. Not what I might see, but how do they see? Go to that deeper story is really important. We talked a little bit about the whole idea, and this is another aspect of my work in terms of, I work with frameworks and trying to understand how am I going to navigate this, is often if you do a literature search and look at frameworks on equity, diversity, how do we implement it? There are many different ways of approaching it, but the core elements are, people will talk about awareness. I framed it under sensitivity, but it's that whole knowledge of awareness, knowledge. You need to have some skills, but most importantly, you also have to think about how do you apply it into practice. I can't tell you how often I've met with people where they have really smart people who've done a lot of work. They have the awareness, they have the knowledge, they have the skills. You don't see the application in practice. So, when I think about knowledge, so I talked to you a little bit about the awareness, the sensitivity piece. What do I mean by knowledge? I think knowledge, again, for me is twofold. One is the knowledge that we have of communities, of cultures, of what we are learning about groups of people, not to stereotype, but to understand the patterns. It is that holding knowledge that Leininger would say, or it is that knowledge about my deep understanding of ways of being, but recognizing that people will have differences in those ways of being, that context matters. So what is the specific knowledge? And to give an example, I worked in Ontario for 30 years. Moving to BC, even understanding the diversity conversation, the context shapes it differently. The Indigenous lands that I am now on, I'm learning about. While there's much similarity in what I am learning here than I learned in Ontario, there's also very specific nuances that I need to learn. Vanessa put up the Indian residential school in Kamloops. I actually live in that area. To try to understand the specific impact of that experience for people here, that's very different than somewhere else. So that specific knowledge becomes very important. And then we talk about what's the skill set. What is that we need to actually work in a humble way, in a way that is trustworthy. And I just put one bullet up there that it is about working within and across difference to earn trust. Don't assume the trust. A key thing is, how do we earn the trust? And how do we bring that cultural lens of diversity and equity to the core nursing skills that we teach, that we have? One of the projects I did many years ago was working with students in what we called bringing together best practices on therapeutic relationships and cultural competence. And it was the students, after we finished working, as we did the project, they said, Rani, why are we doing it this way? Because it is about culturally responsive therapeutic relationships. How do we bring that culture and lens to the understanding and development of therapeutic relationship is really what we're trying to do. And then the whole notion of what helps or gets in the way of application and practice. This was actually a big chunk of my doctoral work in trying to understand organizational factors. What are the barriers? What are the facilitators? And they are both people, knowledge and supports, and multiple things in our own domain. There are barriers in ourselves, there are barriers in our organization, there are barriers in society, but there are also supporters and facilitators in each of those domains. So for me, that became a really important way of trying to figure out how I actually take my understanding and apply it in practice, whether it be in a healthcare practice environment in a hospital, or whether it be in a education environment like a university. So coming back to strategies and what to do, I'm action-oriented, as you might tell, I'm practical, right? So as I said earlier, one of the things that, again, this was one of my colleagues who said, we often want to look for change, but change in terms of new actions don't happen overnight. And they are guided by what this lovely colleague said, feel like new years, new eyes, new thoughts. When we learn to see differently, when we learn to hear those stories, when we learn to think about things differently, that is what helps us do things differently. That is what influences and shapes our actions. So how do we get to that? Make the diversity issues visible. Where do you see equity? Where do you see inequities? Who's included? Who's excluded? Nurses have great observational skills. Use them to look at some of that. And look at that make them visible to yourself and to others. Often that takes pointing out to say, you know, we haven't heard from this person, or they're saying something that's really important. Let's really pay attention and hear it. And that's where, as educators and leaders, I think there's an added opportunity and a responsibility. A key thing to do is acknowledge the difference in differences and ways of being. For us, as advanced practice nurses, as leaders, as educators, as students, as nurses, seek out the mentors and guides who will help us learn, who will help us gain the confidence. And as you learn that, become a role model. Be the change. Baby steps is fine. Commit to the change. That's what's most important. It's about embracing vulnerability. We will make mistakes. We will learn to apologize. That is important. It is acknowledging the harms of the past, learning from them, being vulnerable, recognizing that I am still a learner, which means I will still get things wrong sometimes, and being open to learning not just about others, but from others. And those from others are our community, our people, our students, our patients, our families, all of the above. And when I said it, I think it's also important, I put a star on it. What does it mean for me? I see the whole world through the lens of culture. And as I said, culture to me is both about patterns and about power. So for me, inclusion, discrimination, racism is all intertwined in there. Whatever that looks like for you is really important for you to understand and then work towards. I talked about learning and unlearning, and it is the unlearning that is the hardest. You know, a story that I can share with you around that came from, you know, many of us now will talk about, as we introduce ourselves, what are our pronouns? And as we were trying to teach some of this, for many of us learning, let me back up. When I learned the word they, it was always plural. That's the grammar I learned in convent in India. And so now when I talk about an individual and I'm referring to somebody and their pronouns is they and not him or her, it took me the longest time to say, but that felt wrong because it was an individual. I'm talking about a singular, not a plural. That was an unlearning for me to do because the learning was really important, is to say, I need to acknowledge people as they see themselves, not as I see them. So that's just a small example. And as I said earlier, awareness and knowledge is not sufficient. You have to apply what you do. Mitigating the harm. We know that injustices occur, and sometimes we become very silent witnesses because we don't know what to do. Even if I can't change the system tomorrow, and I can't, I wish I could, we're making changes, it'll take time, but we know racism and discrimination is still happening. How can I stop it, prevent it at a very micro level? It doesn't matter what level. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. Sometimes when I see discrimination or I've experienced it and somebody has come up to me and say, you know, Rani, that was not okay. That validation that somebody else witnessed this is so important. So there are lots of ways we can do this. And I talked to you about the expertise with humility and the vulnerability, so I won't go on it. And it really is about using our own power and privilege. Whatever the roles you're in as advanced practice nurses, you are in a privileged role. Please use that opportunity to make it visible, to recognize the diversity, to support the inclusion, and to advance equity. And I want to end by really saying that, you know, diversity is a strength. And if we can look at how we can encourage the inclusion and belonging by affirming individuals, by bringing out those stories, as Vanessa beautifully pointed out, That is how we will get the equity, which is the outcome we're looking for, the quality and equal outcomes that everybody should have a right to and have access to. And with that, I'm going to stop and figure out how I can not share my screen anymore, which may be hard. Oh, here we go. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite your comments and your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Rani. Ashley and Karen, do we have any questions or comments from our chats, please?
Yes, there's a comment in the chat. It says, thanks, Rani, for the insight. For me, I learn about different cultures and try to apply it when interacting with patients. Also, for individual diversity, I wait for patients to interact and understand their ways and then try to blend in and help them better. Ultimately, patience and kindness really help every time.
You know, Anjali, that is so true. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit to that is I think it's absolutely we need to learn from our patients, but you know, and this is where culture as power comes in. Often people feel like they can't talk about their culture. It's not okay. Because the last few times I started to talk about it, somebody shut me down or they told me that was primitive, you know, that was back home, Rani, you shouldn't be doing this here. I've heard those stories, right? So I have now learned to say, not just, I invite those stories and I don't wait for them. I will go up to people and say, you know, this is very important. What do you do? What is your tradition? What is important to you? And what is healing? All of those things. So this is where take that, Anjali and others, take that idea of absolutely helping that diversity to come out. Because for many of us, we have learned not to bring it out because bringing it out has not always been a positive experience. But it needs to be something because if it doesn't come out, as Vanessa was saying, as you know, as there's so many stories in healthcare, it is critical we understand that. Or, you know, we don't achieve the quality care that we need. Harm happens, people die. So thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rani, for that informative presentation. And thank you for really equipping us and challenging us that we do have a lot of unlearning to do as we learn more. So thank you. So now we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next guest speaker is Nzeruem. Anne is a family nurse practitioner who currently works with an Indigenous organization that provides primary and community healthcare services to 8 First Nations communities in Manitoba. She supports nurses at health centers and nursing stations through in-person and virtual consultation. Anne is also the owner and founder of Mara Home and Health Services, Inc. Please welcome Anne Nzeruem.
Thank you so much, Abby. So I'm going to try and share my screen. I hope I figure it out. Okay. Can you see this? Yeah, good?
Yes, we can see it.
I'm going to try and make it. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the full screen.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak. And I remember when you called me to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I had so many thoughts running through my head, and it was just hard to narrow it down to one topic or narrow it down to one angle because diversity is a whole range of things. But I will. Okay. So some of the things I have so many things on my screen, so I'm just gonna bear with me while I try to cancel some stuff so I can see it. Okay. Awesome. So understanding the implication of diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare, and these are some of my objectives to discuss the inequities facing Indigenous population. I would also want to touch on the underrepresentation of minority group in the workforce and ensuring that future leaders in healthcare incorporate diverse, equitable, and inclusive practices in their organization to improve the health outcome of the population. Okay. So diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a recent focus for businesses, organizations across the world, but perhaps none stand to make a great impact than the healthcare industry, as it directly affects patient health outcome and their quality of life in a profound way. Today, I would like to briefly discuss two topics. And the first is discussing how inequity facing Indigenous population and struggles I face while working in First Nation communities. And the second is how a lack of diversity within certain healthcare profession is a health disparity affecting people of color, people living in rural areas, and low-income population. But before I get into that, I would want to introduce myself. I know you've already done that, Abby, but I would just like to touch on a few things. I primarily work in remote and rural communities, First Nation communities, where I focus on primary and community health. I support these nurses at the nursing stations through virtual and in-person consultation. 2 years ago, I founded a home health company called Mara Home and Health Services, which provides holistic care to individuals in their homes, as well as increasing nursing services in First Nation communities. We have about 30 staff, including nurses, healthcare aides, support workers from diverse backgrounds and environments. Before we dive into this conversation deeper, it's important that we all understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean and represent. By now, I'm just building on what Dr. Ravi and Dr. Vanessa had said. In terms of healthcare, diversity is broadly defined as the inclusion of varied attributes and characteristics. For example, ensuring that healthcare professionals, including nurses, recent graduates, educators, and researchers, are members of varied races, ethnicity, gender, and from different geographical locations. Equity really just means fair and just treatment from all members of a community. One definition of health equity I truly refer to is one framed by the Canadian Institution of Health Information, which states that health equity is achieved when everyone, regardless of their sex, their gender, their income, race, or other social demographic characteristics, have fair opportunity to reach optimal health. Inclusion means creating an environment in which any individual or group can be and feel welcomed, represented, supported, and valued to fully participate. I'm sure you've all heard of the saying that diversity is being invited to a party, while inclusion means being asked to dance. Another concept that I would like to explore a little bit more is health inequities, which means the differences in health status of individuals and group because of unfair treatment. A report article published in collaboration with the Public Health Agency of Canada and the First Nation Information Governance Centre found significant health inequalities for those in lower socioeconomic status, Indigenous people from diverse sexual orientation, racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, and people living with functional disabilities. Furthermore, working in a remote community and having access to very limited resources and also very limited healthcare professional has provided me with insights into the social determinants of health affecting the First Nation population. Public health expert discovers that social environment in which people live, learn, work, and play contributes to health, to their disparities, and it's among the most important determinants of health throughout the course of their life. I would just want to take a little moment going into some demographics. Many Indigenous communities are only accessible by air. Over 50% of Indigenous people living in these regions report not having access to a family doctor, and in turn experience lower health outcomes than non-Indigenous people, which is worsened due to a lack of access to quality health care, especially in these remote communities. In Manitoba, the infant mortality rate for Indigenous people is almost double that of non-Indigenous people, whereas the mean life expectancy for Indigenous men is projected to be 70.3 years compared to 79 for other Canadians. Given the lack of access and the shortage of physicians and nurse practitioners in these First Nation communities, there has been an agreement to expand the role of certain registered nurses who would take additional training to be able to prescribe certain class of medication without having to obtain direct orders from doctors and nurse practitioners. This is one of the services our company provide, Mara Home and Health. We train the nurses to practice at an expanded scope in a culturally sensitive manner, which in turn increases access to timely treatments and intervention. Because there is a wide differences between the health of racialized and non-racialized people, this is categorized as a health disparity. A health disparity are preventable differences in the burden of disease or opportunities to achieve optimal health that are experienced by socially disadvantaged population. Canada remains a nation where public policies, institutions, and historical impact of colonization continues to create harm to individuals and community based on diverse background. These policies and institutional practices result in inequalities that are especially evident for racialized Black and Indigenous people. Racial/ethnical minority groups are at disproportionate risk of being uninsured, lacking access to care, and experiencing worse health outcome from preventable and treatable diseases. If we're using a forward-looking approach to healthcare, from a healthcare perspective, a lack of equity translates to higher cost. When we exclude population, decrease access, and increase barriers, or provide subpar care, then at the end of the day, those people are going to utilize healthcare dollars at a much higher rate. And this is seen evidently by the communities I support. Their health is being patched up until they get really sick to be flown out to the city. By then, there's been progressive advancement in their disease process, which would result in longer hospital stay or eventually death. In so many other cases, as a child with speech delays sometimes do not get therapy at all due to lack of speech language pathologies in community. Specialist referrals are very difficult to coordinate, as this involves booking flights, accommodation, childcare for parents, and God forbid the parents can't make the appointment for whatever reason. These have to get rebooked in advance, and we see sometimes the parents don't show up because of all of these barriers, which automatically would lead to a progression in the rate of their diabetes or their cardiac condition or their cancer. While health inequity has been attributed to poor outcome, a lack of diversity in providers has also been associated with worsened disease burden, which leads me to the next topic of diversity in healthcare. I would like to spend time talking about having a diverse workforce. In 2022, a national study of more than 3,000 healthcare leaders was conducted in Canada. Across Canada, no leaders in health ministry position were perceived as racialized women. 5 of 12 health deputy ministers and 61 of 118 hospital presidents were identified as women, yes. However, individuals perceived as racialized women held only 7 of the 118 highest level hospital leadership roles in the country. And those identified as both racialized and women only held fewer than 5. This is a statistics. I'm not gonna go ahead reading all of them, but I can go on and on across the country. What is evident is that although gender parity is present, but racialized executives and leaders were substantially underrepresented and in all of the provinces. Since I've been practicing as a nurse practitioner, I treat a wide variety of people from different ages, races, people living in urban areas, and people from different socioeconomic statuses. Thankfully, I've been told by minority patients how they appreciate my support because they feel that their health concerns are being properly heard and addressed. They would say to me and thank me that they are happy to see a clinician that looks like them. Representation is very important. It is comforting to many patients to be able to see people like them as part of their healthcare team. Diversity in healthcare can also remove many barriers to accessing proper care, building trust in the healthcare system, which in turn promotes health and well-being. I strongly believe that race and gender-based disparity in healthcare may negatively affect the health of marginalized patients. Evidence suggests that when patients see their race represented in their healthcare providers, they're more likely to have positive care experience and agree to essentially preventive care. This is especially true as I shadowed a Caucasian clinician seeing a young Black female patient. She had came in for a follow-up appointment to finalize her decision on contraceptive. She kept looking at me as though she wanted my opinion on which option of long-term contraceptives to choose. Despite many attempts of the Caucasian clinician trying to explain, I sat and I watched as the patient and clinician went back and forth in their conversation, and I knew it was time for me to say something. I politely interrupted the conversation and agreed with the benefit of IUD as a more suitable option for her. I noticed that a few words I said was all she needed to finalize her decision. She immediately agreed for the IUD to be inserted in that visit and asked if I could hold her hands during the procedure. Again, research has shown time and time that patients from minority groups that are served by healthcare providers that look like them have better outcome. An inclusive and diverse healthcare team helps patients from underrepresented groups feel more comfortable during their engagement with the healthcare system. Ultimately, an increased racial minority group in healthcare is crucial because diversity is associated with positive health outcomes. And these outcomes would include, of course, increased access to healthcare minorities, improved patient-provider communication, improved patient satisfaction, and lower mortality and morbidity rates among minority groups. There are many barriers that prevent people, racialized people, women, and gender non-binary individuals from attaining leadership positions. And these barriers include reduced access to networking opportunity, discrimination from patients and colleagues, and institutional culture that view white male leaders as most effective. Some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion consideration in healthcare. To improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare, we must examine the makeup of our professional institution to ensure that people from different backgrounds and with multiple perspectives are represented. We must understand the background of employees and patients being served, including cultures, their ethnicity, their race, their gender, religious belief, and socioeconomic statuses. We must diversify hiring and retainment workforce to ensure an inclusive representation of patients' population served. We have to set up working groups that are inclusive of different races, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age groups, gender, and ability. It is quite clear that there is a problem. How do we fix this? What are some of the solutions that we can incorporate in this system? Many healthcare organizations and professional institutions are addressing these issues, but we still have a long way to go when it comes to diversifying the system. Hopefully, this talk can start a conversation and give more insights on how we need to change or increase the need for minority health professionals, not only to reflect the people we serve, but to positively change the trajectory of how we treat people and meet the continuing needs of the overall population. Some key recommendation from a landmark study describes the need to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion principle as a core leadership competency in nursing. We need to increase the proportion of underrepresented minority groups in the healthcare workforce by integrating across cultural education into health training and advanced research efforts to identify sources of disparity and promising intervention. Post-secondary education institutions need to ensure that their learning environments are supportive and that discriminatory practices are eliminated. We need to encourage and uplift students from diverse backgrounds at an early stage to consider careers in healthcare. Healthcare leaders and service providers need to establish anti-racism and anti-discriminatory policies, accessible complaint procedures, and anonymous processes for reporting racist acts. We need to develop hiring policies that ensure the appropriate hiring of culturally diverse healthcare professionals. We need to write inclusive job descriptions using inclusive languages. We need to improve cultural competences by collaborating effectively with individuals from different cultures. All of these and many more have proven to improve healthcare experiences and outcome. To conclude my presentation, I would like to say that to avoid tokenism, institutions must promote inclusion alongside diversity and ensure that racialized leaders not only have a seat at the table, but also have an equal voice in decision-making within the executive leadership. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, do we have any questions or comments in our chat, Ashley?
No comments so far and no questions.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much once again, Anne, for a very informative presentation. So at this time, I would like to thank every one of our presenters. We truly appreciate you being here with us to share from your insights and your knowledge. And we truly appreciate the time that you took to spend with us tonight. We would also like to give a huge thank you to the many different people who made this event possible. First off, we would like to thank the College of Nursing Endowment Fund Committee, Endowment Fund. We would also like to thank our APN committee, which includes myself, Ariel, Ashley, Karamvie, Karen, Hannah, and Naomi. We would also like to thank the Graduate Nursing Students Association, including the volunteer and communications committees, and to the College of Nursing, and to everyone who has attended tonight.
So I just have a few final reminders before everyone parts for the evening. We will be posting the conference recording on the GNSA YouTube channel, so you can find it there. Our door prize winners, we will be selecting within the next couple of days, and we will notify the winners by their email address used to register on Eventbrite, and it will also be posted by GNSA as well. There's also still time to make a donation to Needs Inc. And you just seen Ashley posted it back in the chat there. And lastly, we would appreciate your feedback on our conference tonight and to help us plan for the future. So possibly offering up topics that you might be interested in seeing for next year. And there is a link to our survey that Ashley has just posted as well. And it's very quick. So if you could please fill that out. And I think that's everything for our conference for this year. So thank you again, and everyone have a great rest of your night.